This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Today's podcast episode is an inspiring one where I chat with Dan Steele. Dan's a former track and field athlete and someone who successfully changed sports, competing in bobsleigh in 2 Winter Olympics for America. He then went on to have a very successful track and field career as a coach too, so he's got an awful lot of knowledge. We discuss his book, American Steele, his journey to the Olympics, his take on mental toughness in both disciplines. He shares some advice for coaches and an awful lot more. Sadly, Dan no longer coaches as he suffered a stroke in 2017. However, his knowledge cannot be questioned, and some of the pieces of advice he offers are priceless. Enjoy listening. So Dan, it's great to finally meet you. I'm wondering if you can tell the listeners a little bit about your book, and I'm particularly fascinated by this subtitle, The Impossible Olympic Journey.
Yeah, thanks for having me, David. The reason for the subtitle is because my story is just not an obvious one. I wasn't a superstar, coming up. I was in elementary school. I guess I was a superstar at my small little recess group. But as far as somebody being able to see me and point to me and say, okay, this guy's going to go to the Olympics someday, no chance. And I was in high school. I was my freshman year of high school, my first year of track. I was so bad that the coach issued me girls' sweatpants, hoping that I would quit, and I didn't. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. My freshman year of college, I was also. I've never worked so hard in my life just to keep up. Those guys were really good, and I wasn't ready. I wasn't even shaving yet when I got to college. I was going to grow another inch or two and, eventually become a man, but I certainly wasn't there yet. And so when I got in bobsledding, I was part of a team that really had no business making the Olympic team in '98. We were not a sponsored team. The United States sponsors the top sleds, and we were not that. So we went out and got our own sponsors and leveled the playing field and made the Olympic team against all odds. 4 years later, in 2002, I was part of. My driver was 39 years old and always injured. It was his 5th Olympics. He'd never won a medal. Our team was too small, so our sled was too heavy. So we weren't expected to have fast starts. We were coming out of the 2nd seed, which means we were not in the first 10 sleds. And no team in Olympic history had ever medaled out of the 2nd seed. We went off last in the 2nd seed, so we were the 20th sled. So the odds were very much against us. And, it took a million lucky breaks for it all to come together. It's not to discount the talent. There was lots of talent there too, but we got a lot of breaks that came together, and it really was like you couldn't plan for that. It was crazy. So the reason for the title is because even though it's my story, I still see it and just sit in awe of all the crazy twists and turns that had to take place for it to come together.
So in some ways, it sounds like it was against like a lot of the odds, and like obviously you had to show a hell of a lot of resilience in order to overcome some of those challenges.
Yes, that's true. All throughout my journey, I'm a big believer in self-talk. And one of the things when the chips were down and facing impossible odds, one thing that would always go through my head is, they can't break me. They won't break me. And I said that to myself hundreds of times in my life. They can't break me. And sure, that attitude, I think, has served me well.
So I'm just going to take you back. You mentioned there about size as a youngster there.
Mm-hmm.
I hear that most days, and certainly a lot where it can be difficult depending on what sport you're in. So, I mean, what would your be for that young person or that parent of a young person who's not quite sizing up, what would you say to them?
Well, what I would say is, you don't know how the story ends. Be patient, young man, because sometimes you're going to stay small, and it's just not in the cards. It's not going to happen. But sometimes you're not going to stay small, and if you're lucky enough to be that guy who's not going to stay small, but you've thrown in the cards before you should have, well, you're going to fail anyway. So stay with it until you know if you're one of those guys who's going to get big.
And yeah, just because you're big, I suppose it doesn't guarantee anything either, does it?
No,
yeah.
no, and that's that's always a tough question that I'm asked when I meet with kids and schools and things. Is, well, what would you say to somebody who wants to be an Olympic bobsledder someday? And my initial thought is always, well, statistically speaking, it's not going to happen. But you don't want to say that because you don't want to discourage anybody. But the truth is, you got to be a freak athlete. You got to have freak speed, freak power, freak strength, freak determination. And then you've got to be somebody who's got the ability to be big enough to be a prototypical bobsledder. And we're talking, 100 kilos is about perfect. That was always my goal. Just sit on 100 kilos, and I'm the perfect size for bobsledding. And it'll fluctuate by 10 kilos maybe, but certainly 5. So there's a lot of things that are not in your control. Just because you want to be something doesn't mean you can be. And so, yeah, it takes a lot of skills to be in place before the size thing even matters.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose it's a case of, for a period of time, just focusing on those skills that you've got and your strengths, and then trying to maximize them and play to them.
Sure. In the United States, nobody starts out wanting to be a bobsledder. They come from different sports, almost always. They develop their skills in the sports of track and field or American football. And so we've already got some measurable criteria that we can look at to assess and say, okay, this person's fast enough. They seem to be powerful enough. Let's give it a go. Because there's no developmental system for bobsledding. It's a niche sport, and you're not exposed to it as a child.
Yeah. So before you got into bobsleigh, decathlon was your sport. Yeah. So do you want to just tell me a little bit more about like how you see where mental toughness applies to the decathlete?
Absolutely. So, the mental side of the decathlon is it's very, very important. And I always say, we've all know, a lot of us have golfed, and you know the guy that when he slices it into the woods, his game's over. If he doesn't break his club, he's broken himself mentally, and he's just not going to be able to return. And if you're one of those guys, you cannot make it as a decathlete, because over the course of 2 days and 10 events, you are going to have a few missteps. You're going to slice a few into the woods. And if you can't put that shit behind you, it's never going to work. I don't care how talented you are. You're finished mentally, and you can't recover. And it's like a guy going to the casino, but he can't afford to lose anything. And everything he loses, he's automatically thinking he has to win it back. That guy is destined to lose his ass. And in the decathlon, oh shit, I just blew it in the long jump. I lost 50 points. That means in the shot put, I got to get it back. Well, you can't think that way, because it just doesn't you can't. It has to be, figure out how to be at your best in all 10 events. That's all you can do.
So I'm guessing you had events where you did mess things up on one event. Mm-hmm. So what would your process be to move on?
Well, I was experienced enough to know that just like in life, there's a great balance to the universe. Well, there's a great balance to the decathlon. You can bet your ass that whatever you've lost is going to be gained, and it's going to balance out. So you're going to be thrilled a couple times, and you're going to be disappointed a couple times, but there's a balance to it all. So, okay, I just gave one away there. I wonder where I'm going to get it back, but I know I'm going to get it back, because that's just the way it goes.
So you were pretty good at just staying quite neutral and not getting too excited by the great performances and getting too low by the mistakes.
Yes. The competition, the battle, the thrill of lining up 10 different times against these other athletes, man, it just turned me on. It was so fun. And I just loved the excitement of it. And, I could be having a really shitty decathlon, but here comes the 400, and that's my event. And okay, we're going to enjoy this part of it. I'm going to hand them their asses and this one show them what's up, even though today I stink, because I love to compete. And so, yeah, I was okay mentally. I was pretty resilient. There wasn't a time that I can recall that I broke and gave it away.
Yeah, no, it's a big thing. Obviously, you see so many people who can train really well in sports, but then when it comes down to nailing it in events and competitions, they can really struggle.
Yeah. I'll give you a good example. It was 1999. I was at the Pan Am Games in Winnipeg, and I had to achieve the A standard in order to be able to compete at the World Championships. And I was having a solid decathlon, but I wanted to put that standard so far out of reach that it took all the pressure off, and it wasn't happening. I was having a solid meet, and every event was solid. Nothing was great. And it came down to the 10th event, and I was going to have to run a pretty decent time in the 1500 in order to get that A standard. Now, it's a time that I could run, and I had run many times. And so the plan was, Harry Mara was my coach at that meet, and the great Harry Mara, coach at Ashton Eaton. And he and I made a plan where I was just going to sit on the Cuban athlete who was famously consistent in his races, and he was 70 second laps. You could set your watch to it. It was so perfect. And so I was going to sit on him for 3 laps and then just whatever I had left, and that would easily get the time that I needed. Okay. So the race starts, and I'm sitting on him, and I'm thinking, God, I feel so good. I've never felt so good in a 1500. Well, there's a reason why. We came around for that first lap, and the time said 80 seconds. And I was like, but immediately I'm like, oh crap. But immediately I went to, well, this is going to be an exciting finish. And because I had, I already knew in those situations, okay, I can't get it back in one lap. I'm going to get back on pace. And then in the last lap, I'm going to get it back. And so I had the plan in my head. I didn't panic. And it was like many weird situations in my life. There was the stage was set for high drama, and that turns me on. And so it was as exciting as it was, shocking. Like, oh my God. I didn't think I blew it. I didn't. I thought, well, okay, we stubbed our toe a little bit there, and now it's on, and so the rest of it was exciting and exactly how I planned it out. It came down to the last lap, and I saw the time, and I had to run a 61 second last 400 to hit the qualifier, which I'd never done that in my life. That's crazy for a decathlete to be able to drop that. And so I was in uncharted waters, took off like a maniac, and I covered it in probably 59 seconds, and I got the time, and everything was fun and exciting. But that's a time that I didn't panic, when probably panic would have been the logical response, because it was going to be hard to do,
Yeah. Well, there was 2 things that you said there that sprung out to me. Was your self-talk. All right, this is going to be exciting, an exciting finish. And then you said, you didn't panic, whereas, a lot of people would, with the alarm bells would have been going, and their self-talk would have been the exact opposite.
Yeah.
So hats off to you there. And speaking of panic, you shared with me a little while ago something from your book regarding bobsleigh and a crash that took place and how you recovered from that. Do you want to, just want to talk about the general challenges in bobsleigh and that particular instance?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the challenges are the big challenges, as I see it, are really the limitations of any athlete's strength and speed, because we all want to be fast and we all want to be strong and powerful, but I mean, a lot of it is just genetics. Are you predisposed to be fast enough and powerful enough? And if you are, then are you also big enough? And if you are those things, then it comes down to fear, because the fear thing is real. And there's been a lot of great athletes have gotten into the sport of bobsledding, but if they crash once or have a rough trip or whatever, they're never the same. And they don't even know they're holding back at the start, David. They don't. It's a subconscious thing, and it's counterintuitive. When you understand gravity sports and terminal velocity, you know that you can jog off at the start and still hit those top speeds. Or you can hump it off as fast as you can to get a faster downtime, and you're going to hit those same speeds. And so logically, there's no reason to hold back at the start. But that fear thing runs deep, and guys get messed up. Some of them get brain damage, never recover. Some of them die, or they just get melted skin from the crashes. So these are real. These are the realities of the sport. And there's a famous guy that got into it. And I'm not going to use his name because there's no point in it. He's not a bad guy. He's a good guy. But nobody had ever come into the sport with this much talent. He broke all of the records for testing, and the dry land pushes. Nobody had ever been better. To this day, nobody's ever been better. He was just off the charts. And he got on the ice and he took his first trip and he about crapped himself, and which is a very common response after the first trip. And he was never the same after that. He was fine on dry land, but when he pushed that sled, I'm not going to say he's average, nothing average about him. He was a little better than average, but he wasn't the freak show that he could have been and should have been. And everybody hoped he would be. And so as a result, people know him as a famous athlete, but they don't know him as a famous bobsledder.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, fear is such a big part of any sport. But yeah, I can definitely see the reasons why in bobsleigh. So, did you have many anxious moments then?
The very first trip I took, it was obvious to me that the sport is crazy and that the driver has no control. That's what I could not believe it. That first trip I took, people are like, "Oh, it's like a crazy roller coaster." No, bullshit. It's not. It's like a crazy car accident, maybe, but you're out of control. On TV, you'll see them tap the wall coming out of the turner, and it doesn't look like much. Inside that sled, you're getting your fillings rattled out of your teeth. I mean, it's like you got T-bone on the highway. It hits so hard, and so for the most part, no, I was lucky. I had a crash my rookie season in Eagles, Austria, a 2-man crash that was the scariest moment of my life. We were upside down, and we were going over 80 miles an hour at that crash, and it was. I mean, I don't know how much you want me to get into it. I can get as far in as you want, but it was terrifying, and I thought that I was going to die.
I suppose it would be, for me, it would be the next bit. And so how do you pull yourself out of that to then go again?
Exactly. Okay. So we crashed. I thought I was going to die. I didn't, but you have to use your head to survive these crashes. As a brakeman, you take your head and you press it into the ice and lift your body and the sled up off the ice, so you're not being pressed into the ice on your shoulders or your back, because your skin will melt very quickly at those speeds. And so that's how you survive it. Okay, so absolutely terrifying. Survived it. Okay. And then the reality hits that you have to you get 4 training runs, and 3 of the 4 have to be successful. Well, we just blown our very first one, which meant we had to go right back to the top of the hill and go again. And, I'm just trying to get my wits about me. Like I thought I was going to die. Okay. I know I didn't almost die, but that's how I felt. And that was very real for me in the moment. And I'm trying to recover from this thought. And then the idea that I have to go right back to the top of the hill and go again was unthinkable. It's like, no way. I'm not doing it. I can't do it. Well, I just made the Olympic team, and you can't show fear. They'll eat you alive in this sport if you show fear. At least back then they would have. And so we have to go back to the top of the hill, and I'm just thinking, I got to get out of this. And there's no way you can't get out of it. There's no way without looking like a total coward. And so I'm going through my head, okay, how do I do this? I can't do this. How do I do this? And so a mental trick I've used my whole life when I'm feeling really anxious is I imagine the worst case scenario, and then I make peace with it. And it served me well. Well, the worst case scenario with this one is we're going to die. This next trip, we're going to crash again. Only this time I'm actually going to die. And I couldn't get that thought out of my head. Like, that was it. Worst case scenario, we die. And so I went into my self-soothing technique, and it's like, okay, you're going to die. Well, you had a good life. This is a great way to go. You've always wanted to go out in a blaze of glory. This is it. Dying in a bobsled. There's nothing sexier than that. That's amazing. So, all right, you've had a good life. You've traveled. You've loved. You've laughed. Okay, this is it. This is where it ends. Okay. And so in my mind, this is what's going on all the way up the hill. I'm thinking, okay, this is it. Gonna die. And let's do this with dignity. And I calmed down, believe it or not. And so by the time we got up there, I was ready to go. I checked in with my driver to make sure he knew the mistake that he made, knew how to fix it. And he did. He said he did. And so we went off again, and we didn't hold back. I mean, we humped it off, because if we're going to die, let's die with dignity and push this thing off like men. And we didn't crash. We almost crashed, but we didn't crash. And so the relief, feel like a man with a second chance. You get to the bottom of that hill.
I love that story. Yeah, it's in a way, I suppose what you've done, I think there's something out there called negative meditation. In a way, that's what you've done, isn't it? To be able to process that and then to calm yourself down. Yeah, so many people out there are so frightened to go there and I suppose experience that level of like pain, right, what you've put yourself through there.
Yeah.
So we've covered the bobsleigh there. We also you got into coaching after that in track and field.
I did.
Yeah, do you want to share with the listeners, some of the lessons that you've learned from your coaching journey too?
Sure. I did get into coaching, and as soon as I got into it, I just fell in love with it. I loved it, and I found I was pretty good at it, and I absolutely loved it, and I wanted to be great. And from the very first day, I was I'm not going to say call it a panic, but I had anxiety that I wasn't great yet. And I read everything I could get my hands on, because I had inherited some really talented athletes, and I didn't have any experience. I had lots of experience as an athlete, but not as a coach. And when I met with those athletes, I acknowledged this. I said, okay, look, I am not the greatest coach in America yet, but I promise you, before you graduate, if you just trust me, I'll be one of the greatest coaches in the country. And I fully committed to that. Like I said, I read everything. I talked to everybody I could, and I created a training program that was good, consistent with what I'd been taught, consistent with what was out there, and a lot of it was just copying the stuff that was already out there and people were doing. But I didn't want to be a copy of what everybody else was doing. I wanted to be uniquely great. And so over the next 2 years, I guess in my second or third year, I started making changes, some small, some significant, to my program that were very different from what else was out there. And some of the stuff I did seemed a little crazy to me even, but only in that nobody else was doing it. it made sense to me why I was doing it. And I decided I'm going to take every single thing out of my program that I cannot tell you exactly why we're doing it. And that includes the warm-ups, the drills, the sprint drills, the hurdle drills, all those things. There's a lot of drills out there that everybody does. And half the time the coach can't tell you why. And so I was not going to do that. And so I created a unique program that I thought was good, and it was good for the athletes I coached because they were quite successful with it. It kept them fresher, it kept them healthier, and we peaked at the right meets. And so the science behind it, the art behind it, really fascinated me. I fell in love with coaching, and just I couldn't get enough of it. I couldn't turn it off. Every night I would go to bed thinking about new drills and stressing about that I wasn't good enough yet, and it really drove me.
Sounds like you were pretty open-minded. You mentioned there about picking other people's brains and
absolutely
eating, and yeah.
Yes. Because there's some brilliant coaches out there, and there's no point in reinventing the wheel. But here's the thing: there's a lot of things coaches can be doing that other great coaches are doing. But if it doesn't make sense for the program that you've created, then it's not going to be effective. And so within the context of what makes sense to you and what you're doing, then cherry pick and steal from other coaches as much as you can. I say be absolutely shameless and unapologetic about the stuff you're stealing from other coaches, because it's all for the greater good. It's for the good of your athletes, for the good of the sport, really. And it's a competitive field, so best practices can get a little bit hard to identify. So it just needs to make sense to you.
Yeah, as you say, that's just generally what people are doing, isn't it? They're looking at the best approaches, and they're making it their own, essentially.
Sure. And there's problems, and this is, really what coaching is. You're a teacher, and if you're not a gifted teacher, you're not going to be a gifted coach. And part of being a gifted teacher is being a creative problem solver, because every athlete's going to be different and unique. And some of the stuff this athlete's going to stumble on is different than any other athlete you've coached. And you've got to be willing to meet them where they are and identify what the roadblock is, identify, a plausible solution that's not going to undermine the rest of the things you're doing. And you really have to be creative and open to it. It's like kind of like, what makes a great mechanic? Is it a mastery of tools? No. It's his ability to identify the problem, start from the source, and then fix it. Same with being a doctor. Sure, I want my doctor to know everything there is to know about the human body. But more importantly, I want him to be a brilliant problem solver. So when I come in and tell him about something that's happening, he's not just going to fix the symptom. He's going to go to the source of the problem and understand that path and be able to address it. Well, coaching's the same way. And sometimes the problem is technique. Sometimes the problem is in strength or coordination. Sometimes the problem is in the emotional flooding that's taking place in the athlete's mind during those crucial moments. And you have got to be able to figure out what's going on with each athlete so that you can serve them best, which is really what we do, isn't it? We're serving the athlete because I believe it's very much a partnership in making the athlete, helping the athlete become the best they can possibly be, which is really all we can ever do. We all want to win, and I'm a big believer in the psychology of winning. I think it's wonderful and interesting. But you cannot control, if you're a 100-meter runner and you're the best in Great Britain and your dream is to be an Olympic champion. Well, it just so happens that a guy named Usain Bolt is in his prime during your prime. You've got no control over that. The only thing David can do is make the decision to be at his very best when it matters. That's all you can do. Be at your very best. And to be at your very best is, that takes some courage, because you're basically saying there's no excuses. This is it. That's as good as I am. That's as good as I could possibly be on that day. And whatever the truth is, whatever the information and answer to that is, it's a little daunting. It's not for everybody. A lot of people they don't have the courage to face the truth of their own talent and perhaps the limitations of that talent. It takes some strength to do that, I think.
Yeah, no, I Completely agree. Yeah. It's been fascinating conversation, Dan. Really enjoyed it. Are you able to give 3 takeaways based on what we've talked about for the listener?
3 takeaways.
Yeah, 3 takeaways. Let's say based around what we've talked about for the listener there.
I'm sorry, I didn't. Okay. Mostly I was just talking, but even though this probably wasn't on the podcast, what we were talking about earlier, I thought was really interesting, which is the ability to help an athlete oftentimes is going to be dependent upon the athlete's inner circle also believing in you, or you're going to be undermined.
Yeah. And then we also mentioned about the athletes, like receptiveness themselves, and whether they're ready for ready to look inside and have the courage, I suppose, that you mentioned there, of their convictions to be honest with themselves.
Yes, I think the resilient thing, which we didn't get too far into, is you haven't got to experience this, but since my stroke, I'll get halfway into a sentence and completely lose it, and I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's all right. I was just saying there. Obviously, you talked about the coach and their influence in and their power over the athlete, in effect. But I also went on to mention that the athlete has to be ready in order to be honest with themselves and look in the mirror, and then have the courage of their convictions.
Okay, good. You got me back. Okay, so as far as the resilience, so much of that has to do with being okay with losing. And that's not to say that you want to lose, but you can't be at your absolute best if you're not willing, if you can't handle losing. Like, losing cannot be an unacceptable outcome. It's probably statistically likely that you're going to lose all the time. And if that's the thing that prevents you from being at your best, well, shit, you're never going to win. Because it's like every athlete only has so many shots at greatness or glory. And understanding that is very beneficial. You got to know when to swing for the fence and be like, okay, the goal is this. It's an audacious goal. It's unlikely to happen. But the only way it can happen is if we do this, this, and this, which means the only thing to do is this, this, and this. And it's statistically, okay, you're not going to whether kick the winning goal, to use soccer. But your only chance is to go for that impossible shot, because you've got the best goalie in the Premier League, and he's going to be on you. He's going to know what you're doing. So going for the upper left corner on a banana kick, is that something you guys say? But you know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, exactly. I know what you're saying. Yeah.
You got to bend it around 3 guys. Okay, it's a 1 in a million shot. But if you don't hit it, you have no chance. And so that's the kind of resilience that kind of turns me on, like understanding that, okay, the outcome's probably going to be this. We swing for the fence. It could be this. Probably won't be, but it could be. And anything short of that is going to be this over here.
Yeah, I suppose there's probably part of that is being like quite comfortable in yourself and in your own skin in order to go there. Yes,
no, 100%. And I think more and more our society is moving towards an attitude of failing isn't acceptable. And they don't know it. It's not like it's wrapped in this warm and fuzzy tolerance and acceptance package, but it's really not. Which was why it was so annoying to me when watching the Olympics recently and seeing a skier go down, a champion skier go down and not win what they're supposed to win, and everybody immediately wants to go to mental health. And I thought that was so unfair and cruel. Why can't she just be going for it and being on the edge of whatever her talent is and come up short? Why isn't that okay? Why do we have to say, well, she didn't do it, let's talk about her mental health? That is sending the message that if you fail, you're mentally ill. Are you kidding me? That's unfair. It's bullshit. I hate it. And I think more and more we're attributing mental health to failure. And I don't think that's usually what it is. I think maybe sometimes we've got certainly some performance anxiety, absolutely. But that performance anxiety is not mental illness. It's the human condition.
Yeah, you've just opened a can of worms here. This podcast could go on for another half an hour. I think you're right. I mean, let's be honest. If you're an athlete who's trained really hard, you're highly invested in what you do. If you don't feel that twitch of nerves and bit of performance anxiety beforehand, then you maybe want to retire.
You're a sociopath.
So yeah, they're very two different things: performance anxiety and mental health. But yeah, the press, right. They can pick up on it very differently.
Oh, it's crazy, and I think it's so unfair, and it's easy for the athlete then to kind of go along with it when it's not true. And I mean, mental health, mental illness, hugely important topics, absolutely hugely important, and I think it's good that we're talking about it, and those things are becoming okay to talk about. But I think to falsely attribute those to simple performance anxiety. Or sometimes it's not even performance anxiety. Sometimes the athlete just makes a mistake. And why isn't that okay?
Yeah.
I mean, shoot, we can't stub our toe anymore?
Yeah.
Hold on.
I definitely get where you're coming from. But as you say, it is positive that people are talking about mental health. But yeah, we've got to... Yeah. There's work to be done there in terms of the way it is communicated out there. Right, great. Well, we'll call it a day at that. I'm really grateful for your time. It's taken us months to get this podcast recorded, and yeah, it's been worth it. So yeah, appreciate your time, Dan.
All right, and very nice meeting you, David. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, that was a fascinating conversation, that was. So a big thank you to Dan. What I found particularly interesting was when he talked about being level, more neutral, and being able to keep a bigger picture perspective over things when he competes and when difficulties arose. If you listen to this podcast regularly, you'll have heard me bang on and on and on about the fact that many athletes, whether they're young or competing professionally, really struggle to put it together in competitive events under pressure, yet they can easily do so in training. So the lesson I'd say from this podcast is think about what's going on inside your head, your self-talk. And you might want to simply observe this in training and in competitive events. Think about what it is that you're saying to yourself, whether it's helpful, whether it's hindering you. And if you want to take it a step further, write these thoughts down after a training session or after you've competed. That way you're going to see different patterns that occur. You know, it's really clear from Dan that he had a handle on his self-talk. He talked about loving the excitement of competing against top athletes in decathlon. That's right, he loved it. He thought it was fun. And I'd imagine one of the reasons that was the case was the fact that he was focusing on himself, that he didn't pay too much attention to his rivals. And when we consider self-talk, he most definitely wouldn't come out with things like, Tom is faster than me at the 1500 meters. John is better than me at the long jump. Peter is bigger and stronger than me. No, his positivity, his resilience, his sense of perspective highlights that he's thinking about himself. He'd be saying to himself things like, I've trained well. I can do this. I put in the hours in the gym. I'm ready to go. When I'm under pressure, when the chips are down, he mentioned they can't break me. That's the type of self-talk he would be thinking. So as I say, if you find that your self-talk isn't helpful after doing the observation and the journaling, that you do struggle with your maintaining a similar level in training compared to competing, there could well be a connection there. And if you do need some help with this, if you want to think about some emotional flexibility, please do feel free to get in touch with myself or my team. We're a bunch of skilled practitioners with many years' experience. We'll be able to help you consider whether positive self-talk is for you, whether negative self-talk is actually helpful. It motivates you. It might be that getting angry, that can be good for you to play well in your sport. Or on the flip side, being kinder, more self-compassionate, that type of language and that tone of voice may be more helpful. Lastly, we've got mindfulness, remaining more present, non-judgmental about things, that could be a really helpful technique for you to have in your locker when you are under pressure. So yeah, feel free to get in touch. My email address is info@sport-excellence.co.uk. The details are in the show notes. Feel free to drop me an email. We'll get back to you quickly. Have a fantastic week ahead. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sports psychology resources. The Sport-Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.